Hi there, this is Kevin Patton with a brief audio introduction to episode number 37 of the A&P Professor podcast, also known as TAPP Radio, an audio hootenanny for teachers of human anatomy and physiology. Coming up in the full version of episode 37, we'll continue the conversation regarding giving students feedback on their tests. I also discuss the use of the anatomical compass to help students learn anatomy. And I have an update in how we understand the fundamental function of hematopoiesis in bone marrow. And lastly, I have a brief discussion of the idea of the last best story, using a couple of concepts that scientists are currently debating as examples of what I mean by the last best story. I have a whole bunch of word dissections to do this time, so let's get started. The first term is one that I've used frequently in previous episodes of this podcast, and that is neurogenesis. And of course, the first part, neuro, refers to nerves in general, or in this case, the neuron, which is a nerve cell. But literally, that word originally meant cord or tendon, which makes sense because in the very olden days, before we knew much about how the human body was put together, when we looked inside human or animal bodies, many of the nerves would have looked like little cords or tendons, and so no wonder it got that name. So neuro here refers to a neuron. And then genesis is actually made up of two word parts, gen, which means produce, and the esis or esses part means a process. So genesis is a process that produces something or a process that creates something. So neurogenesis is the creation of a new neuron, the production of a new neuron. Our next term is cranial sacral, which is a term that we often apply to one of the two main anatomical divisions of the autonomic pathways in the body. So the first part of that term, cranio, of course means skull, and the second part, sacra, refers to the sacrum of the vertebral column. Literally, that means sacred or holy, and that's because the sacrum in the way olden days was often called the holy bone in Greek originally, and then it was translated into Latin. Why it was considered a holy bone, there's all kinds of stories, so we don't really know really for certain. But that's how it got its name. So craniosacral, skull and sacrum, refer to the two sets of segments of the spinal cord where these nerve pathways are originating in the central part of the nervous system and transitioning to the peripheral part of the nervous system, in the cranial segments and in the sacral segments. So that ties it to how we use that term today. And of course, the AL ending just means relating to. So it's relating to the craniosacral area of the spinal cord. And then another term that is associated with craniosacral is that other division of the autonomic pathways, and that is thoracolumbar. And for some reason, I always want to say thoracolumbar, and I don't know why that is. Probably I had a teacher at some point or a colleague at some point that pronounced it that way, and my brain just kind of picked it up and it pops out sometimes without me even realizing it. So thoracolumbar has, for the first part, the word part thoraco, which is a combining form of the word thorax, which of course means chest, literally. And then the lumba part refers to loin. That literally means loin, or that sort of lower back region of the body. And then we have the AR ending, which means relating to. So thoracolumbar means relating to the thoracic and lumbar or loin areas of the spinal cord. So it's similar to craniosacral in that regard. This is where those pathways originate from the central nervous system and transition to the peripheral nervous system. Thoracolumbar and craniosacral. Then our next term that is going to be used in the upcoming full episode is hematopoietic stem cell, or HSC for short. So I love that term, hematopoietic, for several reasons. One is it just has kind of a rhythm to it and has lots of syllables. And so that's kind of fun to, let that rhythmically flow out of your mouth, right? And so the first part, heme, means blood. Then we have poi, which means make, and then esis, which means a process. So poiesis means making. It's the process that you do when you make something. And one of the things I like about that word part, it always pops into my head when I'm examining words that have that word part, is it's also where we get our word for poem or poetry, where we're making something out of words. We're making something beautiful, I hope, out of words. So now we're looking at the poetry of the body. So we're making something in the body. And what are we making? We're making blood. So this is where the stem cell part comes into it. Stem, which literally refers to a tree or a trunk, also refers to growth, or out of which something grows. And so that stem here, when we refer to a stem cell, is talking about that ancestor cell from which one or more different kinds of more mature or final forms of a cell are going to be produced. And then, of course, cell itself just means cell. Literally, it goes back to a word that means storeroom because, well, I guess under the microscope, they sort of resembled little storerooms. And so there we go. Hematopoietic stem cell is a blood-making stem cell. Our last term is rosette. And you might think, wow, where did that come from? What does that have to do with A&P? Well, you'll see in the full episode where it refers to that little rose-like symbol that's found on maps that, you and I probably more often call it a little compass symbol or compass points or something. But for many people, that resembles a flower or a rose. And so it has that name. And so those are sometimes called compass roses, but they're usually pretty small. So a lot of times we use the term rosette, that E-T-T-E ending, meaning small. So a small rose. And we're going to be talking about those compass rosettes in the full episode, and how and why we're doing that and how that relates to anatomy or physiology. You're just going to have to tune in and see. This podcast is sponsored by HAPS, the Human Anatomy and Physiology Society, promoting excellence in the teaching of human anatomy and physiology for over 30 years. Go visit HAPS at theapprofessor.org/HAPS. Hey, I just registered for both the annual conference in Portland near the end of May and the South Regional meeting in Louisville at Bellarmine University at the end of March. And I put in a proposal to do a workshop at each one of those. Hey, the deadlines are coming up soon. So go visit HAPS at theapprofessor.org/HAPS so you can go too. I've just started reading a book that I'm really excited about called Nonsense on Stilts: How to Tell Science from Bunk. It's written by Massimo Pigliucci, and I'm really excited about it, so I thought I'd add it to our A&P Professor Book Club. So what's going on with this book? Well, as more and more parents are refusing to vaccinate their children for fear it causes autism, although this link has been consistently disproved. And about 40% of Americans believe that the threat of global warming is exaggerated, despite almost universal consensus in the scientific community that man-made climate change is real. So why do people believe in all that bunk? And what causes them to embrace such pseudoscientific beliefs and practices? Well, the noted skeptic, Massimo Pigliucci, separates the fact from the fantasy in a really entertaining exploration of the nature of science, the borderlands of fringe science, and, borrowing a famous phrase from philosopher Jeremy Bentham, the nonsense on stilts. Presenting case studies on a number of controversial topics, Pigliucci cuts through the ambiguity surrounding the science to look more closely at how science is conducted, how it's disseminated, how it's interpreted, and what it all means to our society. The result is, in many ways, a taxonomy of bunk that explores how science and culture intersect. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, such intersections of science and culture are brought up in my own teaching of human anatomy and physiology. So this book is especially helpful for clarifying how that can be done effectively. No one, not the public intellectuals in the culture wars between defenders and detractors of science, nor the believers of pseudoscience themselves, is spared in Pigliucci's cutting and thorough analysis in this book. In a nutshell, Nonsense on Stilts is a timely reminder of the need to maintain a line between expertise and assumption. And yeah, it's timely, even though it was first published almost a decade ago. So check out the link in the show notes or the episode page at theapprofessor.org, or go directly to the A&P Professor Book Club at theapprofessor.org/book club. A searchable transcript and a captioned audiogram of this preview episode are funded by AAA, the American Association of Anatomists. Their big conference is coming up as part of the Experimental Biology meeting in April in Orlando, Florida. Find out more at anatomy.org. Well, this is Kevin Patton signing off for now and reminding you to keep your questions, comments, and limericks coming. Why not call the podcast hotline right now at 1-833-LION-DEN. That's 1-833-546-6336, or visit us at theapprofessor.org. I'll see you down the road.